September 11th, 2001. The terrible events of that day will live in infamy, but the United States would ensure that those responsible would pay the ultimate price.
Justice will be done.
On May 1st, 2011, elite members of SEAL Team 6 carried out a daring operation with extraordinary bravery and precision.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world, justice has been done.
And now, the historic coin mint is making available this rare commemorative coin, paying tribute to the team who carried out Operation Geronimo.
People can get a little loopy if they think too much about money, because money lays bare a fundamental contradiction of capitalist ideology. On one hand, your net worth is supposed to be an objective measure of your own value as a human being, a symbol of your own rugged individual productivity. As Ayn Rand put it,
money rests on the axiom that every man is the owner of his mind and his effort. Money allows no power to prescribe the value of your effort except the voluntary choice of the man who is willing to trade you his effort in return. Money permits you to obtain...
Whoa, stop. I was joking. No more Ayn Rand. I was just kidding. But on the other hand, money is and always has been a social contract, and a particularly fluid one at that. You earn money on the assumption that people are willing to accept it, and willing to accept the same amount of it for a given good as last time. No matter how much of a big bad, ruggedly individualist titan of industry you are, your power rests in the hands of the masses in a fundamental way. Because at the end of the day, money is just debt, and people can always just decide to not pay you back. The right, from the libertarians to the neo-Nazis, are all about reifying capitalism and the class hierarchy contained within. But since money, like any financial instrument, is inherently unstable, essentially, the building block of capitalism is also the wrecking ball that will destroy it unless it's regulated by the government. And that drives the right insane. There is no issue in which wingnuts are more likely to believe dumb pseudoscience or insane conspiracy theories than in monetary policy. And considering how much they love pseudoscience and insane conspiracy theories, that's saying a lot. Now, during Obama's reign, there was consensus on this issue among rightists. Anything that made money cheaper was bad. Lowering the interest rate, even during the worst economic crisis in our lifetimes, would lead to hyperinflation. Until Trump got elected, this was a unifying theme between respectable Republican politicians and wacky conspiracy mongers.
I contend the greatest theft in history is happening right now, and they are in on it. And it has been led by Mr. Potter, the Federal Reserve.
This theory is basically a bastardized form of an old school of economics called the Austrian school. The Austrian school of economics has been thoroughly debunked and is now the sole purview of racist lunatics. Speaking of racist lunatics,
I have been fighting with Aragorn-like flourishes, the orcs of irrationality, for many, many decades, and now...
This stuff is a perennial favorite of Stefan. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 2 months ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 5 months ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 7 months ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 9 months ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar a year ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 2 years ago. Here's Stefan Molyneux predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 2 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 3 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 3 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 5 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 5 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 6 years ago. Here's Stefan predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 8 years ago. Here's Stefan Molyneux predicting the imminent collapse of the dollar 10 years ago. Well, at least he's consistent. But this consensus broke down in 2016. The really committed libertarian ideologues stayed the course, but Trump, for his part, knows better, at least for as long as he's president. He knows damn well that the Fed raising rates means slower growth, and he's going to bitch and moan every time they do it.
No, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy.
And then there's the alt-right, which is trapped between its need to pander to traditional libertarian conservatives, its slavish devotion to supporting Trump no matter what, and the paranoia of traditional far-right groups about banks and money lending because of, them. And that brings me to who I really want to talk about.
By allowing women to fuck freely, the West has de facto entered a matriarchy.
Black Pigeon Speaks. You know, I like BPS. He's honest, in his own sick way. Most right-wing YouTubers, from the most centrist to the most unreasonable, avoid actual policy like the plague. Now, partially this is because most of them have 9th grade educations, and they know it's above their pay grade, but more importantly, it's a hell of a lot easier to make the case that it's the left that's dangerous when everyone is focused on some theoretical debate about the difference between sex and gender and not the plans of right-wing governments to substantially cut healthcare services.
And we've got to attack the drivers of our debt. Our debt will literally get out of our control. This is a plan not only to pay off our debt over time, but to get our budget under control so we can get our economy growing. I heard the last announcement. We're not actually proposing Medicare vouchers. We're proposing no changes for people 55 and above, and then for people 54 and below, moving Medicare into a system that is identical to the system I have as a congressman and all federal employees have. It's called premium support. They're not.
Campus protests, pronouns, safe spaces, migrant caravans, Twitter memes, anything to distract people from the fact that the movement you support is having a material negative effect on the lives of like 99% of the population. But BPS, he just jumps in headfirst in the real issues. International politics, international finance, foreign policy, and he is just so in over his head. His videos on these topics are like works of demented collage art. Oh my god. No, Felix, what are you doing?
We may never know for what combination of reasons President John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man didn't think the Zapruder film was dramatic enough, so he added his own sound effects.
But the one thing that ties the 35th president to the 16th and the 25th is that they all realized the plague that is the debt-based system of money under the control of private banking, and how it was and is a detrimental force to the health of the nation. And whether by sheer coincidence or by calculated intrigue, they all lost their lives to an assassin's bullet.
You heard it here first, folks. John Wilkes Booth was an agent of the Federal Reserve that didn't exist yet?
I've spoken at length of Jackson breaking the private banking cartel in the 19th century when he vetoed the renewal of the charter for the Second Bank of the United States in July 1832. Moreover, of the nebulous way privately controlled central banks manipulate the creation of money for their own monstrous greed. Links for these more fleshed out videos are in the description.
The only video linked in the description is a 4-hour-long VHS tape from 1996, which, among other things, accuses the Rothschilds of inciting the American Civil War.
But to summarize for the sake of brevity, you must understand that central banks have always sought to prohibit governments from paying off their debts and being debt-free. This, of course, is impossible in the connected system of debt and money under fractional reserve banking.
Look guys, the national debt is not complicated. You spend a certain amount, you collect a certain amount in taxes, you borrow the difference. The Fed doesn't get a say in that. Alan Greenspan is not a Machiavellian mastermind that forced George Bush to blow up the debt with his stupid tax cuts and wars. George Bush chose to do it because Republicans like war and giving rich people money.
Even more so, global banking cartels seek to quash any would-be government that chooses to print and furnish its own money supply without cost or debt.
Are there Goldman Sachs sponsored coups I've missed? Alright, you know what? Maybe I should just explain the whole fucking monetary system so you understand just how nonsense this video is. So you're a bank. People give you money to store and you lend it out. But the guy you lend it out to is also probably going to store most of that lent money in your bank. So you lend it out again and again and again, and that works fine. Until too many people ask for their money back at the same time. Then everyone's fucked. Preventing this means choosing one of two options, making it illegal for banks to loan deposits, which would basically mean no loans for anybody, or creating a big pot of money to bail everyone out with. But if you just bail people out, they'll just take bigger and bigger risks. So instead, you lend the money out with interest. Now, they won't take risks unless the expected value of the payoff is greater than what they lose in interest payments. Now, incidentally, this not only stabilizes the private banks, it also gives the central bank a lever with which to rein in inflation. This is where politics enters the picture, and things get ugly, because the power to control the supply of money is the power to induce and, in most cases, end recessions. And by extension, it's the power to make whoever is in political office popular or very, very unpopular. And so there's a lot of incentive to mismanage it. If you put it directly under control of the politicians, they'll print too much money because they have an election to win coming up. For example, President Erdogan of Turkey, who put his son-in-law in charge of the treasury, and is now facing a massive currency devaluation problem. So your choices are leave it up to the free market and have a Great Depression every 20 years, or put banks in charge and have them manipulated to pad their own pockets, or put politicians in charge and have inflation or even hyperinflation, or the thing that most countries have settled on, which is an independent central bank staffed with political appointees that have fixed long terms. It's sort of like the judiciary. You have some accountability to the people, but it's not totally beholden to the whims of whoever's in office. Anyway, that's monetary policy in a YouTube video. So where's Black Pigeon Speaks again?
For Christians listening, this means usury.
Shut up, no it doesn't.
The point of this presentation is not to weave a web of conspiracy with regards to long-dead presidents and their assassinations.
Okay, sure.
Lincoln was able to get Congress to pass a law that authorized the printing of full legal tender treasury notes to pay for the war effort. Lincoln printed $400 million worth of greenbacks, money that he delegated to be created, a debt-free and interest-free money to finance the war. It served as legal tender for all debts, public and private. He printed it, paid it to his soldiers, to the U.S. civil service employees, and he also bought supplies for war. He was assassinated shortly after the war ended. Thereafter, Congress revoked the Greenback Law and enacted in its place the National Banking Act.
This has nothing to do with the central bank. There was no central bank. There would not be a central bank for another 40 years. He couldn't afford to borrow, so he paid his soldiers in scrip.
The 25th president, William McKinley, began his attack against the banking cartels with his Secretary of State, John Sherman. They used the Sherman Antitrust Act against the J.P. Morgan financial empire, known at the time as the Northern Trust, which by the late 1800s owned nearly all of America's railroads. Shortly after President McKinley began attacking the central bankers, he was assassinated in 1901, allowing his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, to take power.
You think committed anarchist Leon Czolgosz was doing the bidding of America's most notorious robber baron? Also, Felix, I hate to tell you, but it's your side that likes out-of-control monopolistic capitalism.
He was the quintessential so-called robber baron of the Gilded Age. But he was probably more responsible than any other single individual for the creation of the American middle class and the development of America as a great industrial power. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and his story is uniquely American.
Upon office, one of his first acts was to drop the United States government lawsuits against the Northern Trust.
This is just straight up a lie. Theodore Roosevelt pursued the case and he won, and he broke up the trust. That's why they call him the fucking trust buster.
While of course having several critics, it has been argued that by issuing Executive Order 1110, President John F. Kennedy was trying to rein in the power of the Federal Reserve by authorizing the U.S. Treasury to issue United States notes, which were created by the U.S. government directly and not by the Federal Reserve.
Well, at least the Federal Reserve actually existed to take part in this part of the conspiracy. But, no. That executive order wasn't about replacing Federal Reserve notes with U.S. Treasury notes.
The name Federal Reserve Bank was designed to deceive, and it still does. It's not federal, nor is it owned by the government. It's privately owned. It pays its own postage like any other corporation. Its employees are not civil service. Its physical property is held under private deeds and is subject to local taxation. Government property, as you know, is not. The regional Federal Reserve banks issue shares of stock to the member banks that own them. 100% of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are private banks. The U.S. government owns 0 shares. While the actual owners of the Federal Reserve, the people themselves, are unknown, As stated, the Federal Reserve is still essentially owned by the member banks, and how the 6% profit the Federal Reserve takes is dispatched is also unknown.
This is so fucking stupid. Look, yes, the bank is technically privately owned, but in 1935 the decision-making process was centralized into one committee called the FOMC, and it was set up so that the Board of Governors, all presidential appointees, always form the majority of the committee. If the banks were going to kill a president for taking away money-making power from them, this is when they would have done it. And you can see the problem here for the Stefans and Black Pigeon Speakses of the world. Globalist liberals are supposedly in league with the banking cartels, and yet the president who actually managed to take away control from the banking cartels is the founding father of globalist big government liberalism himself, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They can't acknowledge that, or their whole argument would fall apart.
And President Trump, who, for now tepidly, has begun to attack the Federal Reserve and in particular its chairman Jerome Powell of endangering the U.S. economy by raising interest rates.
He appointed Jerome Powell.
Accordingly, it is my pleasure and my honor to announce my nomination of Jerome Powell to be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Trump is getting angry at his own employee for not printing more fiat currency because he thinks it will help him win the midterms.
He said, "I'm just saying this. I'm very unhappy with the Fed because Obama had zero interest rates." And he said this to the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, that every time we do something great, he raises the interest rates.
This is also a lie on Trump's part. The Fed raised rates under Obama, probably too early, which in turn slowed economic growth and helped Trump get elected.
Obviously, President Trump understands the reality of the deeply insidious Federal Reserve System and the danger fraught with dueling with those that control the money supply.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Oh, God. So it turns out these contradictions between what libertarians want and what Nazis want and what Trump wants don't need to be addressed. All these people are just too pig ignorant of basic policy to even notice the contradiction between a movement that demands hard money and a president that demands soft money. The sad truth is the right is immunized against internal dissension by its own stupidity. But that's only true of the laity. The leadership of the Republican Party knew exactly what it was doing, and that's what makes this statement so revealing. Trump said a lot of horrible shit, and the rest of the party has refused to condemn most of it. But this might be the most damning thing they've refused to condemn.
No, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy.
It's not offensive, it's not fascist. Arguably, it's not even wrong. You can certainly make the case the Fed is raising interest rates too fast. But this is the policy Republicans spent the entire last decade arguing would cause an economic disaster. And their silence on it now is a tacit admission that they knew that wasn't true. Which is to say, it's a tacit admission that they spent the last decade trying to intimidate the Fed into sabotaging the economy for political gain. And no one, even the people who usually delight in pointing out a Republican hypocrisy, noticed, because the subject is just too arcane. But there's another elephant in the room that's gone unmentioned. Who are those elites? It's a question Felix studiously avoids answering, and no one is more frustrated by it than his own fans, who angrily debate whether Felix is simply pretending he doesn't think it's the Jews, or if he's one of them. And, I don't know what he believes either. So Felix, you've come this far, tell us how you really feel. You don't owe it to me, but you certainly owe it to your loyal viewers and patrons, no? Unless you have something to hide too. And a special thanks to my patrons, Young Jabba, Frosted Chocolate Sprinkle Wingnut, and the Snarky Lesbian.